Calvin Reese was 37 years old, and he had not planned to test anything. He had planned to celebrate. He had driven home from the regional office in Charlotte that Thursday afternoon with a bonus letter in his jacket pocket, $74,000, performance-based, issued ahead of schedule, and a reservation at the restaurant where he had proposed to his wife 6 years prior. He had the letter. He had the reservation. He had the ring cleaned and polished because he had been thinking about renewing their vows on their upcoming anniversary, and he had wanted everything to feel new. He pulled into the driveway and heard her voice through the screen door before he reached the porch. She was on the phone. She was speaking without lowering her voice, the way a person speaks when they believe no one is close enough to hear. And what she said, in the flat, administrative tone of someone managing a logistics problem, was this: that if Calvin lost this position, if the restructuring they had been discussing actually came through, she would not be staying. She had not built her life, she said, to go backward. She had not married a man with potential just to watch potential run out. He stood on his own porch and listened to his wife speak about his hypothetical ruin the way a contractor speaks about a building scheduled for demolition. He had not lost his job. He had just received $74,000 and a letter of commendation. She did not know that. She had no idea he had been listening. What Calvin Reese understood, in the 45 seconds he stood motionless on that porch, was that the woman inside had been running a calculation he was never meant to see. He did not know yet how long she had been running it. He did not know yet who else was part of the equation. But he was a systems analyst, and he understood, with the cold precision that had earned him that bonus letter, that a calculation this fluent had not been started today. What happened next would cost Simone everything she had just finished counting. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from, and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The morning had started the way most of their mornings started in the split level on Briarwood Drive in Charlotte, North Carolina. The coffee maker had clicked on at 6:15. Calvin had been awake before it, the way he was almost always awake before things happened, a quality his grandmother had called being ahead of the noise, and his colleagues had learned to call an edge. He was a systems analyst for a regional infrastructure firm, the kind of work that existed in the gap between engineering and management, where someone had to translate the logic of physical systems into the language of budgets and timelines. He was good at it in the particular way that quiet people are good at things that require sustained attention, not with fanfare, not with visible effort, but with a consistency that made results look inevitable. His team of 11 people trusted him the way you trust a load-bearing wall. You don't think about it. You just build around it. From the outside, Calvin Reese looked like exactly what his wife told her friends he was: stable, dependable, a little boring. He drove a gray Chevy Silverado. He went to bed at 10:30. He made his own lunch 4 days out of 5. He had not been to a barber in the past 6 years who charged more than $20, not because he couldn't afford otherwise, but because it did not interest him. What Simone had told her friends was not inaccurate. It was just incomplete. His grandmother, Ruthie Mae Reese, had raised him in a brick house in Gastonia after his parents' marriage dissolved when he was 7. She was 81 now, and still sharp, and still lived in that house. She had taught him to play chess by the time he was 9, not because she thought he would enjoy it, but because she believed a man who could not think 3 moves ahead had no business making decisions that affected other people. She had a saying she returned to whenever he had a problem he was working through in her kitchen: patience is not waiting. Patience is watching while you wait. He had never found a better description of his own professional method. He had met Simone Garrett at a professional development conference in Raleigh 8 years prior. She was in marketing for a healthcare network, ambitious and direct and quick-witted, and she had walked up to him at the networking reception without hesitation and asked him what he actually did as opposed to what his badge said. He had told her honestly. She had listened with full attention, asked 2 follow-up questions that demonstrated she had processed what he said, and told him he was the first person at the event who had said anything worth the cost of the hotel room. He had been entirely won over by the directness. He would think about that later, about how a quality that had attracted him had also, in the wrong hands, become the thing that cut cleanest. The early years had been good. He believed that genuinely, even now. She had been a real partner in the way that the word is supposed to mean: present, engaged, collaborative. She had pushed him toward the systems analyst certification he had been putting off. He had gone with her to 3 different cities when her career required relocation conversations, even when those conversations didn't go anywhere. Because he had understood that her ambition was not in competition with him, it was just part of who she was. They had renovated the kitchen on Briarwood together and argued about tile for 6 weeks, and arrived, finally, at a choice they both thought was fine without being exactly what either of them wanted. And he had thought at the time that this was what marriage actually was. A series of tile decisions, a shared tolerance for fine. Somewhere in the last 2 years, something had shifted. He had noticed it the way he noticed most things, as a small anomaly that did not yet add up to a pattern. She laughed at her phone more than she laughed with him. She had stopped asking him about work, which she had once done every day with genuine interest. She had joined a new gym she drove 20 minutes past 2 other gyms to attend. He had filed each of these observations the way he filed everything, not acted on, not discarded, just dated and stored. They had been married 6 years. They had no children, by mutual agreement, pending a conversation they had been having in slow motion for the last 2. The house on Briarwood was in both their names. The joint account was well funded. The surface of their life, if you drove past it in a gray Silverado, looked solid. He had kissed her cheek that morning before she left for her office. She had her phone in her hand before she cleared the door, and he noticed, just noticed, without attaching anything to it, that she angled the screen slightly away from him as she passed. He had not said anything. He had picked up his jacket and his lunch bag and driven to work. He had left for the regional office with the bonus letter folded in his jacket pocket, and he had made a restaurant reservation on the drive-in, and he had spent the day in a state of quiet, private satisfaction, the kind that comes when years of methodical work produce a result that confirms the method. He had driven home with the radio off, thinking about nothing in particular, windows down. The early November air in Charlotte, carrying the particular smell of cooling pavement and dry leaves. He had turned into his driveway and heard his wife's voice through the screen door. He did not go inside immediately. He stood on the porch for 45 seconds. And then he walked quietly back to his truck and sat in it in the driveway with the door closed. He ran back what he had heard. She had said, "If the restructuring comes through." That phrase required context he did not have. He had not told Simone about any restructuring. There had been internal conversations at his firm about reorganizing one of the regional divisions, but nothing affecting his position, nothing presented to staff, nothing he had brought home, because there was nothing to bring, which meant someone had told her, or she had heard something from a source he had not considered. His hands did not shake. He sat in the truck for 11 minutes. During those 11 minutes, he did not call her. He did not send a text. He thought, methodically, about what he had heard and what it implied, and how many alternative explanations existed, and how probable each one was. It was the same process he used when a system produced an anomalous output. You did not panic. You did not override. You traced the signal back to its origin. There was one more piece of the call he had not fully processed yet, because his mind had gone quiet when he heard it. She had said to whoever was on the phone, "I've been telling you, for 2 years, this was a risk." 2 years. That phrase had an antecedent. That phrase was the tail end of a longer conversation that had been happening somewhere he was not present. He picked up his phone. He opened his banking app. He looked at the joint account, normal. He looked at his personal account, normal. He looked at the credit card statements, normal. He thought about the secondary credit card she maintained for business expenses, the one that ran through her employer, and that he had never examined. because it was not his to examine. He made a note on his phone. He dated it. Then he went inside. She was off the phone. She was in the kitchen opening mail, and she looked up when he came in and smiled. A real smile, practiced into naturalness, the kind that takes time to develop. "How was the drive?" she said. "Fine," he said. Uneventful, he made himself a glass of water and stood at the counter and talked to her about the drive and the weather and a project update from his office. And his voice was exactly the same as it always was. She was watching him with one eye and her phone with the other. He noticed that her nails were new. He noticed that she was wearing a perfume he did not recognize. He did not comment on either. He ate dinner. He watched 2 hours of television. He went to bed at 10:30. Patience is not waiting. Patience is watching while you wait. The next morning, he called his brother-in-law, Dwayne, not Simone's brother, but his cousin Marcus's husband, a man who worked in corporate HR and had spent 20 years understanding how people behaved when they believed they were not observed. Dwayne was methodical, private, and entirely trustworthy. He answered on the second ring. Calvin told him what he had heard. All of it, in sequence, without editorializing. Dwayne was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You didn't tell her anything was wrong at work." "No, and she already knew to be worried." "She was not worried," Calvin said. "She was prepared." Another silence. "Those are different things," Dwayne said. "Yes." He could hear Dwayne thinking. "What do you need from me?" "Nothing yet," Calvin said. "I need to know the shape of it before I move." "You're going to tell her," Dwayne said. It was not a question. "I'm going to tell her I lost the job," Calvin said. "And I'm going to see what happens next." There was a long pause. "You're sure you want to see it?" "I need to see it," Calvin said. "Whatever this is, it has been running for 2 years by her own count. I've been living inside a structure I didn't design and didn't know existed. I need to know the whole shape of it before I do anything." Dwayne said, "All right." He paused. "Call me after." "I will." Calvin ended the call and sat for a moment in his truck in the parking lot of a hardware store, 3 miles from his office. Then he called Patricia Webb, the attorney who had handled his individual contracts and estate documents for 4 years. He had not needed her for anything adversarial before. He hoped she had time. She did. He explained the situation. He did not overstate. Patricia listened without interrupting, and when he finished she said, "How much does she know about your full financial picture?" Calvin had thought about this. The joint account. The house. My salary. The Gastonia property? No. His grandmother's house had passed to him 18 months ago when Ruthie Mae had moved into assisted living. The property, in a neighborhood that had gentrified steadily over the previous decade, had been appraised at $310,000. He had not sold it. He had been paying the property taxes quietly from his personal account while he decided what to do with it. He had not told Simone because it was not yet relevant and because, he realized now, some instinct had told him not to. He listened to that instinct now with new appreciation. "The retirement accounts?" Patricia asked. "She knows I have them. She doesn't know the balances." Patricia made a note. "And the bonus?" "Deposited yesterday to my personal account. She doesn't know about it." Patricia was quiet. Then, "All right. I want you to document everything you heard. Date, time, what was said, exact language as close as you can reconstruct it. Don't do anything irreversible until we've talked again." She paused. "And Calvin, be careful. The way a person behaves when they believe there's nothing left to lose tells you something. Make sure you're in a position to receive that information safely." He thanked her and drove to work. He sat through 2 meetings that morning and said exactly what he would have said on any other day, and no one who looked at him would have seen anything different. He had learned, over 16 years of working in rooms where the stakes were real and the margins were tight, that the greatest advantage a prepared man had was looking exactly as unprepared as everyone expected him to be. That evening he told Simone he had been called into a meeting that afternoon. He told her there were concerns about his division. He told her, watching her face with the full attention of a man who had been paid for 16 years to read the outputs of complex systems, that it was possible he would be let go by the end of the month. He watched her process it. She did not cry. She asked 2 questions, both financial. How much severance? Would they convert the Cobra? She did not touch him. She did not say anything reassuring. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said she needed to make a call and excused herself to the bedroom, and he heard the door close. And he heard, not the words, but the tone. It was the same tone as the porch. He did not sleep much that night. He did not need to. He had what he needed in 11 days. Dwayne, operating on his own time and through a series of conversations he had with mutual friends and former colleagues of Simone's, confirmed what Calvin had already begun to suspect. There was a man. There had been a man for somewhere between 18 months and 2 years. His name was not important. His position was, he was a senior director at a competing firm. The kind of title that carried a car allowance and an expense account and represented, in Simone's arithmetic, a particular class of security that she had apparently decided Calvin no longer represented. The restructuring story had not come from corporate rumor. It had come from a conversation Simone had shared with this man, in which she had apparently disclosed enough about Calvin's employer to allow him to pull the relevant industry reports and make a projection. She had not been reacting to a rumor. She had been planning around a scenario she had been briefed on by someone who had done the research. $34,000 had moved from their joint account over the preceding 22 months. Incremental, 11 transfers, none individually alarming, all to an account Calvin had not known existed. Patricia identified it in the discovery process, a personal savings account opened under Simone's maiden name 18 months after their wedding. The bonus letter, still in his jacket pocket, remained there. Calvin sat with all of it for one evening, alone in the house while Simone was at what she had described as a work dinner. He sat in the living room with the lights on and his grandmother's voice in his head, and the pattern laid out in front of him in the documented, organized way of a man who had spent his career building systems that did not fail. He opened a new document on his laptop. He began to type. He was done grieving by the time he closed it. He asked her to meet him for dinner on a Saturday. Not the restaurant where he had proposed, a different one, quieter, with a private table he had reserved in the back. He had called ahead. Patricia was available by phone. Dwayne knew where he was going. She arrived in the blue dress she wore to events she considered important, and sat across from him with the careful composure of a woman who had been rehearsing for a version of this conversation and was not quite sure which version had arrived. He let her order. He let her settle. He asked about her week. She answered in the general terms she had been using for months, the slightly elevated register of someone maintaining a performance, and he listened with the same attention he had always given her. The attention she had once told him made her feel seen in a way she had not expected. Then, he set the folder on the table. It was not thick. It did not need to be. 11 bank transfer records. A timeline. A single printed page from the savings account in her maiden name. She looked at it. Her composure held for 3 full seconds. Then it did not. She tried several approaches in quick succession, the way a system runs backup protocols when the primary fails. She said she could explain. She said it wasn't what it looked like. She said he didn't understand the pressure she had been under. She said his name, twice, in the soft register that had always worked. He let her finish. Then he took the bonus letter from his jacket pocket and placed it on top of the folder. I received that the same afternoon I heard you on the phone, he said. I have not lost my job. I have never been at risk of losing my job. I make more money than you know about. I own more property than you know about. He paused. You made a calculation about what I was worth and what you were willing to do about it, and you made it a long time ago. I needed to know the full shape of it before I moved. She was looking at the letter. The house will be handled by my attorney, he said. The joint account has been flagged for the recovery of the transferred funds, which under North Carolina law are recoverable as marital assets moved without consent. Patricia Webb will be reaching out Monday morning. He stood. He gathered the folder and the letter. He put on his jacket. "Calvin," she said. He looked at her once, steadily and without anger, the way a man looks at a structure he has finished inspecting. Then he walked to the front of the restaurant, paid the check, and went out into the November evening. He drove to Gastonia. He sat in his grandmother's empty house, in the kitchen where he had learned to play chess at 9 years old, with a cup of tea and the lights on. He called Dwayne. He called Patricia. He sat for an hour in the quiet of the brick house, where everything that was true about him had been formed, and he did not feel destroyed. He felt precise. You didn't need to be a systems analyst to understand when a structure had been built on a false load calculation. You just needed to know what weight-bearing actually looked like. 11 months later, Calvin Reese sat on the porch of the Gastonia house, which he had spent 4 months renovating. New roof, refinished hardwood floors, the kitchen Ruthie Mae had always wanted, and had been told 3 different times they'd get around to eventually. He had gotten around to it. The cabinets were white oak. The counters were soapstone. The kitchen faced east, and in the mornings the light came in low and warm and landed on the floors in a way that made the whole room feel like something that had been there a long time. Ruthie Mae had come for Thanksgiving. She sat in the new kitchen and ran her hand along the countertop and said, "You did right." She said it the way she said most important things, once without decoration, and with the full weight of 81 years behind it. The Briarwood house had settled cleanly. The transferred $34,000 had been recovered in full as part of the marital settlement. Simone had moved into an apartment in uptown Charlotte. The man whose name was not important had, according to Dwayne, moved on to a different situation with the same efficiency with which he had apparently approached every other arrangement in his life. She had lost her senior marketing position after a conflict of interest review connected to the shared employer intelligence. She had a new job in mid-tier communications and lived, by all accounts carefully. Calvin had not gloated. He had not reported her to anyone who didn't need to know. He had simply closed the loop on every financial connection between them and walked away with the same deliberate calm with which he had done everything else. He had been seeing someone for 3 months. Her name was Renee Hoskins. She was a civil engineer, which had made Dwayne laugh out loud when Calvin mentioned it, and she had opinions about drainage systems and subfloor ventilation, and had once spent 20 minutes explaining to him why the way a house handles water in its first winter tells you everything you need to know about whether it was built right. He had listened with full attention. She was not performing anything. She asked questions that demonstrated she had processed what he said. He had thought about that first conversation with Simone at the conference in Raleigh, and he had understood that he was drawn to a quality, not to a person, originally, but to a quality, and that the same quality existed in people who were worth it and people who were not. And the work was in learning the difference. He was learning. He held his tea in both hands on the porch of his grandmother's house and watched the last of the November light move through the yard. He had planted a row of arbor vitae along the eastern fence line. They would take a few years to fill in. He was not in a hurry. Some things, he thought, were worth the patience to build right. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.